This is an audio book. The Young Comedians, Chapter 1, Part 2. We found a place to smoke on the planter under the science building windows. Jack took a kitchen match from his jeans pocket and lit up. "You know who you remind me of?" he asked, handing me the burning Pall Mall. "Who?" I asked. "Dennis the Menace on TV." "Well, you remind me of Lucy Ricardo's husband, only shorter. Mr. Babalu?" He grinned and pounded an invisible conga drum and crooned, "Babalu!" "Oh, Ricky," I said in a terrible Lucille Ball screech, "can't I go to the club and meet William Holden, please?" As we traded these lame jokes, I think we both felt a quickening sense of excitement, feeling that we'd discovered some unusual fellow creature with whom we could communicate. It was a pivotal moment in my life. Nothing was going to be the same again. The world would always be divided into the time before I met Jack and the much more interesting time after I met Jack. We smoked furtively, handing the Pall Mall back and forth, and discussed 1. Galaxy science fiction and the "Let's build an extraterrestrial" article. "That's what I was building with my cartoon," he said, "and there was Parkins up there as a model." He cackled and grinned. Mr. P. was born to fit the role of the sad sack extraterrestrial. 2. The Sid Caesar Show, the best comedy show ever, except maybe for Steve Allen on The Tonight Show, one of us said. We both imitated Steve Allen squeezing an imaginary ooga horn, "Ooga!" and laughed ourselves silly. While we described bits from the two shows, we used lots of hand gestures and did funny walks. We contorted our faces and stuck out our tongues. We bulged our eyes and spoke in comic accents. We recreated the show so vividly in our minds that I could see Steve Allen's face under a funny hat with a flower in it, or Imogene Coca doing a cross-eyed expression while she danced a hoochie cooch, and we almost wept with laughter. 3. The new movie Them, about giant ants attacking Los Angeles through the flood control system. This one was particularly appealing. We lived not far from the LA flood control and could imagine huge black ants the size of Oldsmobiles pouring out of the gigantic storm drains and onto the campus of Hughes Junior High. We both made the high electronic screeching sound of the ants until we heard a woman's voice yell, "You boys shut up!" and close a classroom window above us. Sitting there, talking to Jack, I felt like some extra spark of electricity fired at the back of my brain, giving me funny or silly things to say that I wouldn't have said to another kid. If Jack had known, and I never ever said such a thing to him lest he think I was some kind of queer, he would have said that it was his, quote, "old Jack magic," which was actually one of his arsenal of twisted song lyrics. On the other hand, there was something almost scary in it, like I felt a funny chill, like what was happening was letting a little bit of my inner, stupid, uncool self leak out. I never completely got over either feeling. 4. The current issue of Mad Magazine, especially the cartoons of Don Martin, whose style Jack somewhat resembled. "Oh, I do borrow the big feet with the turned up toes from him," he admitted. "And the eyes, the big eyes with hooded lids." "Yeah, those," he said, "but my style is developing." 5. Mr. Parkin's algebra class, but only briefly. "Oh, sorry, did you get in a lot of trouble?" Jack asked, sitting, kicking his shoe against a planter, making a tapping sound. "Oh, not bad. He was just sad, like we wore him out." "Poor bastard," said Jack. "Yeah, poor bastard," I agreed. Then Jack showed me his dancing talents at the science building entrance. "What the hell are you trying to be?" I asked, watching him hop up and down the concrete steps. "What do you think?" He made a tapping sound by banging his heel 5 or 6 times on the top step. "I'm Fred Astaire!" Jack was wearing those metal taps you can nail in the bottoms of your shoes. He threw his arms and legs around wildly, leaping up and down the steps in random zany patterns, his shoes tapping on the concrete. He sang, "I'm dancing and I can't be bothered now," a Fred Astaire song, while tapping and jumping, sometimes just jumping backwards off the steps, still singing, "They do! The karaoke is not a foxtrot or a polka," until he was out of breath, and we sat down on the steps and talked some more about science fiction and the latest issue of Mad Magazine. From then on, I noticed he always wore taps on his shoes, so he could practice a little Fred Astaire toe tapping at odd moments. You would think with all those odd moment practices he would have gotten good at dancing, but he never did. Dancing, I realized as the years went by, was his natural enemy, but he never knew it. He thought that dancing loved him as much as he loved it. We left school, since it was getting dark. Jack fired up his old J.C. Higgins with the rusty fenders and rode slowly alongside me. By the ninth grade, I was too cool to ride a bike to school, and besides, it was only a few blocks to my house in California Heights. "Well, it's been weird," I said. Actually, I'd had more fun with Jack in the last hour than in the last year at Hughes. Every time I looked at him pedaling along, hovering on top of the rusty old bike in his multicolored shirt, I thought of more funny things to talk about. What did he think of George Gobel? What about Ernie Kovacs and the great thing he did with the Guerrilla Orchestra, the Nairobi Trio? I demonstrated the marimba playing gorilla pounding the top of the ape band leader's head while it wasn't looking. "Yeah, then it rubs its head and turns around and pounds the wrong gorilla," said Jack gleefully. While we got to the edge of the playground, I said, "I go this way. I go this way." He hooked his thumb west, which was weird because it was the direction of Country Club Drive. I couldn't imagine Jack coming from one of those big ivy-covered mansions, unless his father was an eccentric millionaire who dressed his son up in a clown suit and put him on a rusty bike to go see how the common folk lived. "Really? What's over there?" He gave me a funny look and said, "Our address is 3769 Country Club Drive." He waited for my reaction. "Okay," I said, trying not to look too astonished. "Your address is 3769 Country Club Drive." Maybe my millionaire theory wasn't too out of whack, and any minute a uniformed chauffeur would pull up, throw Jack's J.C. Higgins in the back, and drive him home. I couldn't help myself but add, "You're kidding, right?" figuring this was just one of Jack's put-ons. "That's what I write down for my mailing address. Actually, we live across the PE tracks on a road where they don't deliver mail. If you look at 3769, all you find is a row of mailboxes next to Las Cerritas Park. And if you strain your eyes and look down the hill, across the tracks from there, past a couple of oil derricks, you can see the roof of my house. It's just this side of the LA riverbed." "Well, that sounds cool," I said. "Well, actually it is, in a kind of bizarre sort of way," he admitted. "The Country Club Drive address is what I have to put on all my school stuff, but they treat me differently for a little while. Then they figure out I'm just a roofer's son who lives on a broken down ranch with a goat." "A goat, huh? Now that's really cool." "Again, in a bizarre sort of way, it is." He pedaled off in the gathering gloom. Looking after him, I was already troubled. Jack should be my best friend, I realized, but there were so many reasons why he couldn't be. The first reason was distance. Where he lived was so far away, especially since I didn't ride my bike anymore, and there was more than a year before my first car. I mentioned Jack to my parents that night. "Oh, that must be the old Velasquez place," said my dad over a Budweiser. He had his work shoes off and was in his recliner with an LA Angels Hollywood Stars game on TV. My dad works as a machinist, but he owns his own shop, supervising 10 other machinists, making parts for Douglas aircraft. So it was a little different than Jack's dad, who he told me just worked as a roofer for somebody else. "I didn't know that was still there," my dad went on. "We used to buy milk at their dairy. There was a riding stable, too, I remember. Most of it's gone now, but there must be a little piece of the ranch left." "His dad must have married one of the Velasquez girls," said my mom. "I remember them. One went to Las Arenas when I was there. She was a pretty thing." "For a half Mexican," said my dad. "Mel," said my mom, and shook her head. "She was a very nice girl." I felt funny when he said that, as though something like a mildly noxious gas had just oozed out of his mouth and hovered there without dissipating, like a see-through turd. But it did answer a question as to why, for a guy named Banyan, Jack had this vaguely exotic air like Ricky Ricardo. Besides the distance, there was another reason Jack and I couldn't be friends, and that was me. Since my earliest days, I had tried to be one of the cool kids. I was a wise guy who tried to make funny remarks, but I wanted to be a cool wise guy. I didn't know if I had the nerve to be the friend of the most uncool kid I'd ever seen, someone who wore giant horn-rimmed glasses and a funny handmade shirt, had a weird ethnic background, and danced all over the school steps trying to sing like Fred Astaire. Cool and being cool had a very particular meaning in 1959. You wore the right clothes from the right stores, Desmond's and Buffum's, not Sears or Montgomery Ward. You liked the right music, which at the moment was the Platters and the Penguins. We played on 45 RPM records, not the scratchy old Glenn Miller 78s the chaperones played for us at sock hops. You were athletic and good at least one sport. This was my real failing. I was actually pretty miserable at most sports. I didn't like getting knocked down in football. I couldn't hit a fastball to save my life. I tried to make do with basketball. My dad nailed up a backboard over our garage door. He practiced patiently with me, hour on hour. After a few weeks, I could actually put a Wilson basketball through the cotton net, at least on the third try. I knew I was marginal at best, and got picked for teams maybe fifth or sixth. My real preference would be to drift to the back and not get picked at all. Maybe go get a soda or something while the other kids knocked each other around on the field. It was never said, but was generally understood, you didn't associate with Mexicans, or Negroes, or Asians. Since there were hardly any minorities at Hughes Junior High, one black girl who was the daughter of a maid on Country Club Drive, that wasn't too hard. Above all, you acted cool. That meant not getting excited and jumping around unless you were a girl cheerleader. You didn't laugh too loud, but just smiled ironically at funny things. You acted like you had a lot of brilliant thoughts going on inside, but you just didn't feel it was worth the effort to share them with a bunch of squares or uncool people. Take for a model Marlon Brando in The Wild Ones. Or, if he was too working class, and he was, take James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause, a troubled middle-class kid in his red windbreaker and cool '51 Merc. He was perfect. He was the loner we all wanted to be. The least we could do was dress like him. But the next day, after meeting Jack, I thought it was going to be fun to see him again. I looked forward to it and thought of a couple of funny things to say in advance, things other kids probably wouldn't get, like a joke about President Eisenhower being the baldest man in America. They'd had a contest to see who had the least hair anywhere on their body, so when Eisenhower won, they made him president. It wasn't really a great joke. I worked on it in the shower that morning, thinking the problem was that Eisenhower wasn't totally bald but had a little gray fringe. But I could claim that that was part of a disguise the Secret Service made him wear. Like I said, not my best material ever, but I was only in the ninth grade. But the idea of having someone at school to tell such a joke to, that was great. After second period, I was standing with Jimmy Schroeder, who was the ninth grade vice president. It was kind of a step up for me because Jimmy was one of the country club drive kids. Uh-oh, said Jimmy, seeing somebody coming from behind me. Here we go. I turned and saw Jack in a totally different, even more colorful homemade shirt, and making that same theremin sound he'd made yesterday, the creepy sound from The Day the Earth Stood Still. He had a goofy grin and did a quick little Fred Astaire two-step near the water fountain. I was glad to see him and wondered about the dropping the Eisenhower joke on him right now instead of waiting for seventh period algebra, where he sat behind me. "Hi, Steve. Hi, Jimmy," said Jack, approaching. "Well, look who's here," said Jimmy sarcastically. "Hey, Spaz, I looked up that address you gave me, and guess what?" Jimmy turned to me and explained. "This guy told me he lived on my street. He even gave me an address." "Oh, that was just a put on, Jimmy," said Jack. "I didn't think you'd—" "And guess what?" said Jimmy. I didn't know what. Remembering yesterday, though, I guessed. My stomach felt uncomfortable. The Eisenhower joke fled from my mind. "I'll tell you," Jimmy said. He had a cool, wry smile, like somebody about to enjoy squashing a bug. "There isn't a house at that address at all. No, nuh-uh. There's nothing but a mailbox all by itself next to the park. The people across the street told me it was a mailbox they let some Mexicans put up because they didn't have a real house of their own. Is that the problem, kid? You don't have a real house of your own?" "Why don't you go screw yourself with a rubber ducky," said Jack, and moved off toward the almost went after him, but I didn't. I stayed there and talked with Jimmy while Jimmy said, "Can you believe that guy faking his address? How uncool is that?" Jack didn't talk to me in algebra that afternoon, and when he passed the paper forward it had 5 parts of an equation, all correct, and no cartoon. Then 2 things happened that changed everything. The state of California bought Jack's house, the old ranch parcel, to flatten and build the 405 freeway on its way through Long Beach toward Orange County. The freeway construction would obliterate a lot of real estate, aiming at the cheapest stuff, no doubt, vacant fields, oil sumps, the ghetto, and what was left of the Velasquez Ranch. The second thing was that Jack's parents bought a house 2 blocks from mine on 37th Street. Jack would always claim that it was a total coincidence, but on the first day of summer vacation there was a moving van on 37th Street as I walked by, on my way to the little store on 38th to get some Pez and a bottle of Pepsi. There were a couple of adults who looked very working class and out of their element, moving into this nice upper class neighborhood. They could not have afforded the house in all the world if it were not for the beneficence of Caltrans and their bulldozers, who were even now probably making a flat dirt swath out of the old Velasquez ranch. The dad wore a fedora hat and a workman's shirt stained with asphalt. His skin was tanned dark walnut, and when he took off his hat to wipe his brow there was a totally white band of skin across his forehead and around his ears. He was unloading a cardboard box labeled East Side Beer from the rear of a little Nash Rambler that was much smaller and dirtier than the other cars in the neighborhood. 2 ladies watched from a window across the street and closed their chenille drapes when the dad turned to look back at them. A skinny neighbor next door was out washing his giant Chrysler in the driveway and staring over with a "well, there goes the neighborhood" stare. The dad hoisted his East Side box to his shoulder with a gesture of a man used to lifting heavy things. Beside the dad was a little round woman in a blue woman's suit that looked faded and tired. She wore round gold-framed glasses, as did the man. They looked around themselves as though this was the first time they'd been here, though an agent must have shown them the house before. A nice white stucco Spanish style with blue trim that virtually hummed with its middle classness. If I could find the one word that defined the couple best at that second, it would be dusty. I felt as though I was watching Ma and Pa Jode climb down from their oaky flivver, having made it all the way across the Dust Bowl, or two soot-covered immigrants getting off the boat at Ellis Island, or pioneers who drove an ox team and had trudged 2,000 miles across the prairie. The couple stood there, blinking their dusty eyes. Maybe they thought moving had all been a big mistake, wondering if they weren't better off in their cramped little place back in the old country. But the Czar, or in this case Caltrans freeway builders, made their return impossible by obliterating their homeland, the Velasquez Ranch. And behind them came Jack, today wearing an old Hawaiian shirt with parrots and monkeys on it, and rolled up Levi's above some weird-looking shoes. He was carrying a box of comic books and looking cheerful as hell. "Hey, Jack," I called. "You want to hear a joke about President Eisenhower?" That was the first thing I said to Jack that summer, which I still think may have been the best summer of my life.